The Indigo Girls self-titled album, Indigo Girls, and the opening montage you heard Closer to Fine, and now you're going to hear Tried to. All right, Matt, what are the stats on Indigo Girls?
Oh, sorry. Shoot.
Oh, he's playing the Indigo Girls.
Push the wrong button. Shoot. All right, Josh. I got too many things going on my computer here. All right. Girls Indigo goes to number 60 1980s on albums, number 54 in 1989, number 28 of the Indigo Girls albums. Not make Rolling Stones list, and they are ranked number 1,284 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Okay. The Indigo Girls are two people, Amy Ray and Emily Saliers, and they are from Atlanta, Georgia, metro area. They actually met in elementary school and started performing in high school together, and then took the name Indigo Girls in college after they both went to separate colleges, and then both at different times decided to come back to Atlanta and attended Emory University instead. So they reunited at Emory University and started performing under that name. They picked the name by going through the dictionary and looking for a word that they liked. So that's what they came up with that. They released
that happens a lot, right? We have people going through dictionaries like Grateful Dead. Somebody else did it recently. Oh, I think one of the bands we just covered did that as well.
Yeah, who was that?
The Pixies. That was the Pixies.
Yep.
So
yeah, good call. And they released a single in 1985 called Crazy Game, and later that year they had a 6-song EP come out named Indigo Girls also. In 1987, they self-produced and released their first album, Strange Fire, and this drew the attention of Russell Carter, who became their manager and is actually still their manager, crazily enough. Epic Records then signed them in 1988 after the success of other female singer-songwriter acts that we've discussed, such as 10,000 Maniacs, Tracy Chapman, and Suzanne Vega. This led to their major label release that we're talking about tonight, Indigo Girls, which is technically their second full-length album. It reached 22 on the Billboard album charts. The single Closer to Fine, which I'm sure you guys were familiar with, reached 52 on the pop charts and 26 on the modern rock charts. They won the Grammy in 1990 for Best Contemporary Folk Recording, and they were nominated for Best New Artist, but lost to Milli Vanilli, who later had to give back the award. It went gold 6 months after this album came out, and eventually it reached platinum. Now, you may have heard some familiar voice on this album. Michael Stipe sang on the third track, Kid Fears, and other members of REM performed on the sixth track, Tried to Be True. The Irish band Hot House Flowers contributed backing vocals on several tracks, including Closer to Fine. And interestingly, they don't ordinarily collaborate when writing songs together. They write separately, and then the two of them come together to work on arrangements. We're not covering them anymore after this. This is one of their highest profile albums, I would say, although they continue to have success after this. So I'm going to give the rest of the bio also. In the 90s, they reached platinum on their second album, Nomads, Indian Saints, and on their fourth album, Swamp Ophelia. They were a contributing act to Lilith Fair in the late 90s, and that is, I think, a big, driver of their success and kind of opened them up to a larger audience. And on their 1997 album, Shaming of the Sun, it debuted at number 7 on the Billboard charts, driven in large part by their appearance at Lilith Fair. Their track Shame on You from that album received more airplay on Top 40 radio and alternate rock radio than any of their other singles up to that point or to date. They continued to release albums and tour all through the 90s and 2000s. In 2017, they toured with a symphony orchestra and released a double album called Indigo Girls Live with the University of Colorado Symphony Orchestra. I did not know the University of Colorado had a symphony orchestra, but now I do. Their latest release is the 2020 album Look Long, which I actually listened to. As I mentioned last week, I will be seeing them in a few weeks with Neko Case, my wife's favorite band. Neko Case is my wife's favorite artist, not Indigo Girls, but she also likes Indigo Girls. And so we're seeing them, and it's a pretty good album. It still has this folk rock stylings that this album kind of has, along with some kind of funkier, more rocking tracks that I responded to. So check that out if you're interested. Amy Ray has done solo work. In addition to being in the Indigo Girls, she released 6 albums over the career and founded the indie record label Damon Records. Emily Saliers has also released a solo album and is a co-owner of Watershed Restaurant in Decatur, Georgia. She's also the initial investor in Flying Biscuit Cafe in Atlanta, which I've been to, the one in Gainesville, because I think they franchised out since she probably initially invested. So that was interesting. I thought it was a pretty good restaurant. So hopefully she's making money from that as well. Both of them, I should say, have long identified as lesbians and are engaged in LGBT rights and activism and other causes such as the environment, Native American rights, and abolition of the death penalty. They are considered icons in the queer community. So Indigo Girls, I knew Closer to Fine, but I didn't know the rest of this album. So what did you all think?
Matt, I'll let you take the first one. I'll take second.
Okay. So I, like you, Josh, knew Closer to Fine. I don't know. Maybe I heard some of these songs here or there. This is like one of my sister's favorite bands, maybe her favorite. And I was always jealous of her because they tour all the time, and she always gets to see them. And my favorite band, Radiohead, like tours once every 7 years. I'm like, son of a bitch! Like, you get to go see your favorite band all the time. That must be awesome. So, this is folk music, right? You know, folk rock, perhaps you might want to call it that, but it's pretty much a stripped down. You know, every song's essentially, 2 acoustic guitars, harmony, right? Harmony vocals. Yep. They throw some drums in there. There's some more full band stuff, like you said. The REM guys play some stuff, and that you can definitely tell that, like, what is it? Try to Be True, Love, Land of Canaan. Those are very kind of more upbeat. There's like a little bit of a Byrds kind of jangle guitar and Try to Be True, which I really liked. And I kind of was thinking. And then there's some more mellow songs, like Love's Recovery, History of Us, Prince of Darkness. I'm realizing that a lot of the more mellow songs are Emily Saylor songs than Amy Ray songs. But so this is a really easy, enjoyable listen. This is kind of, somewhat in my wheelhouse, a little bit of the Americana kind of vibe as well. I was thinking this week, I was like, this kind of reminds me of James Taylor, but in a positive way, because I much prefer their voices. It's kind of along a similar vein of like that, the soft folk rock kind of, introspective, like, there's a lot of, reflections on life and love and, and things of that nature. I did follow along with some of the lyrics. I was able to kind of pick up some themes here or there. Some of it just seemed like throwing a bunch of cool imagery together that I couldn't really make heads or tails of. I'm also an idiot, so that maybe I don't always pick up on those things.
Idiot.
I'm an idiot. So Kid Fears was a great song, I thought, and it was interesting listening to that because I was listening to it and I was going, I think I've heard this before. And so my initial thought was, I've heard somebody else cover this. And then I looked up where I might have heard it before. And the closest I came to, I guess Jason Isbell in the 400 unit covered this, but it wouldn't have been that. And I don't know if I don't think I heard this as an Indigo Girls singing this. I don't know, maybe if there was a band or something that I saw at some point that covered this, like at a show that I was at, that just kind of stuck with me because it was such it's a cool song. It's got a very, it's got a great chorus, I think. And it's kind of got this there's a melancholy undertone to it and a little bit more of a minor key thing, which I always kind of find, more interesting. So it's kind of, it strikes me as earnest, it's like this very emotive kind of they're kind of serious artists that are really, either they have messages or they have, just ideas and emotions that they're trying to get out, which I think could be off-putting, right? If you're not into like kind of folk music or the little self-serious, music, this might be a turnoff. Actually, I watched the video for Closer to Fine, and it was hysterical, because they're just like walking around. It's very like 80s/90s, and they're walking around in like torn jeans and just like at some sort of abandoned warehouse of some. Tin flute comes in. They're just all of a sudden there's a bunch of guys, and they're wearing this really, it's like this like hat with a feather out of it, and some. They're draped like curtains or something, like quasi hippie kind of thing. So it's a little bit eye rolling at times, when you're like, all right, guys, come on, get over yourselves a little bit. But musically, this is an easy thumbs up for me. I do like folk music. I think their melodies are great. I think their harmonies are great. I think the guitar playing, it's not terribly intricate, but there's some cool little guitar parts that are happening. And, I think it's a really solid album. I don't think there's maybe History of Us. That might be the last song. It's a little bit long. It drags a little bit. It's a little bit too slow, but for the most part, everything else, thumbs up on. So I enjoyed this record.
Nice.
Yeah, this is a very interesting one, isn't it? Because nowadays the Indigo Girls are kind of a little bit more mainstream. And when I was growing up, right, the Indigo Girls were not mainstream. They were in some ways it was a less enlightened time, right? So they're candidly, if I'm being honest, I think most people when they thought of the Indigo Girls first thought of the issues, and especially the fact that they were a definitively lesbian band, right? Who identified as lesbian and like unabashedly so, right? Not negative. It just was when I grew up with them, and you were to say to me, what's the first thing you think of about the Indigo Girls, I would say that it's like a lesbian band, right? Like group. And then the second thing would be Closer to Fine, right? That would be the two things I would say. And that wasn't I didn't say it with edge, but there was a little bit of a barrier to them because it kind of felt like this music is not for me. And there was sort of a little bit like as a male, right? It's funny because I think we've established I love female singers, and in some ways most of my favorite music is female energy, right? But there was that subgenre, right, of the Indigo Girls and like Ani DeFranco and even to some degree someone who did not cultivate that belief, like Tori Amos, right, who famously did not want to be niched in that, right, to the point of like sort of rebelling against the idea of Lilith Fair and stuff. But there were barriers where it was like, okay, this is music and it may be good, but this is not necessarily music for me. I feel to some degree, Matt, it's like how you've talked about metal before. It's like this music exists, but I don't know if I'm the person it's supposed to be listened to. So I'm just going to kind of like not engage with it for a while. And I think that might have been where the Indigo Girls sat with me for a while. Not a negative thing, but it was sort of like, okay, they exist, but there's a lot of music and this might be for someone who's not me. So then really around like the mid 2000s is when it was a more enlightened time and I was more enlightened and I kind of went backwards. It was interesting, by the way, that just as a side effect, the barriers on stuff that was definitively androgynous male-wise did not turn me off of checking any of those music out, interestingly enough, despite the fact that I am definitively heterosexual, right? There was nothing about like, oh, this is like androgynous, but this is not for people like me. Somehow the maleness of it, I guess, was the lack of barrier. So I just thought of that while I was going. I was like, that's very interesting because, Bowie, the Smiths, like all of these people who are sort of gender bending or providing alternate sexuality, right, didn't stop me at all from engaging with them. So, but then when I went back and listened, I quickly realized the second thing, which is that there's like two Indigo Girls to me. There's the Amy Ray songs, which I really connect with, and then there's like the Emily Salier songs that I connect with a little bit less, if I'm being honest. And I never quite knew why until I found out later that a lot of her solo work and just her influences of Amy Ray are remarkably similar to my influences, right? She has a punk rock background in terms of what she was interested in. And just the stuff just always seems to have a little bit more edge. It's absolutely folk music on this album, but there just seems to be a heft to something like Land of Canaan and Prince of Darkness comes to mind. Or excuse me, not Prince of Darkness. I'm sorry, that's a Sailor song. Blood and Fire, right? Kid Fears, right? That Matt did. I don't know what it is. There's an edgierness and a heftiness to it. There also aren't as many words, I think, as there are in some of the Salyer songs. Now, Secure Yourself is an exception to that rule. That is a very word-heavy song. But so from that end of things, I look at this as when I look at most of the Amy Ray songs, I very much connect with them. The Emily Salyer songs, like History of Us, Matt mentioned, is a little long. Love's Recovery doesn't do as much for me. Closer to Fine is definitively a great song. So that one pops out. But even Prince of Darkness stretches to that like 5 minutes and 22 seconds. You know, History of Us gets to 5:20. And kind of for me, folk music, about 4.5 minutes is about the overstay, because then I feel it starts to become a loop a little bit and a little bit more chanty, which I think some people love about folk music, like return to the verse, same, you know, second verse, same as the first, you know, third, go out. And I know, Matt, that is less of a barrier for you historically, like revisiting that. But for me, a couple of those dragged a little bit more. And I thought it was notable that Closer to Fine checks in at 3:59 lengthwise compared to some of the other ones, because it's the perfect length. So this is definitely a thumbs up for me. Is that Michael Stipe singing on Kid Fears?
Yes, that is.
Okay, yeah, I was like, because I did not expect that. And I was like, wait a second. That's pretty clear. Like, I knew that they were from Georgia, but...
You said that, right? Did you say that, Josh?
Yeah.
You did, yeah. Okay, I somehow I missed it along the way. But, like, I figured, oh, Georgia and Georgia, why didn't I put two and two together? And obviously Michael Stipe, at this point, he was not out, I guess, yet. But it was certainly already being rumored, right? And he at least was cutting sort of a more ambiguous front, I'd say, sexuality-wise. So it makes sense on a lot of fronts, where they're from, musical style, sort of that shared allyship. But yeah. Yep. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, they recorded this album in Athens, where a lot of the REM,
oh wow, okay,
at the same studio where a lot of the REM albums were recorded, and I guess a bunch of other bands as well.
Pylon, right, was in that general neck of the woods that we covered. Yeah, B-52s, right?
Yeah. John Keane Studios in Athens, Georgia. So.
There was another one too. Was it Guadalcanal Diary? Were they from Georgia too? Okay, yeah.
So yeah, I thought this album was pretty good. I knew Closer to Fine. I didn't know any of the other ones. I, like you guys, just kind of never really listened to them outside of their singles that I heard on the radio. I didn't think about the split between their songwriting in the songs, but it's true. I do respond more to the ones that are from Amy Ray when you were listing those off. I appreciate their harmonizing. I think that works really well throughout the album, and I think that adds like a depth to their sound that's really good. I think the fact that they both play acoustic guitars, I think that can kind of wear on me a little bit at times, but they then add stuff to certain songs to flesh it out, like when Michael Stipe comes in on Kid Fears, or when the rest of REM comes on Tried to Be True, or even Land of Canaan, which kind of has a more full sound to it. And I think that kind of balances out the acousticness of it. I think I like when they add more to the songs, when it's kind of bigger. The songs feel kind of like small and personal when it's just them and the acoustic guitars, and I don't really respond to that as much. There's a lot of religious and like spiritual imagery and lyrics throughout, not just on the title tracks or on the track titles, you know, like Land of Canaan, Prince of Darkness. Those could be considered, you know, religious-esque, and a lot of like existential like issues and pondering on these songs as well. So yeah, I agree, Matt, it's a pretty earnest album, and I think there's not a lot here for me that like feels like fun and joyous, which I think which they may, you know, this is their second, you know, first major release album, so they probably explored that in subsequent albums or something, for all I know. But and I feel like listening to their most recent album, there is kind of some more like playfulness and lightheartedness in it. So it may just be this album, but that kind of like weight of the songs kind of, I felt that listening to this album. So it wasn't like really a fun listen for me, even though I appreciated aspects of it. And yeah, so I'm glad I listened to it. Emily always really likes singing Closer to Fine unprompted, so she was enjoyed listening to the album as well. And the and I think there's enough here that it's a good introduction to like kind of their ethos and like what they are, and probably, you know, some of those later albums in the 90s that went platinum. If you like this, you'll probably like some of their other stuff more, I'm guessing. And so yeah, I thought this was interesting. I'm giving it like a thumbs in the middle. I didn't like truly love it, but I appreciated it more and respected it more than being like super into it.
Yeah, there's a simplicity to this that I definitely liked. It wasn't trying to be anything that it wasn't. It was lived in, and I appreciate the authenticity of it. I'm not always the biggest fan of folk music, but to me, the two things you gotta have are, you gotta have, if you're two people, you gotta have good harmonies, which they have, and you gotta have, for me, songs that don't fall into triteness.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the worst thing about folk music is when it becomes try hard. And I did not feel any of these songs were try hard, which is a pretty significant compliment from me about folk music, because the opposite of try hard is authentic. And this always felt authentic to me. And I think that's why their fans love them so much, because you can't fake authentic.
Oh yeah.
And I never got any idea that they did not feel the feelings or express the ideas, you know,
right,
like really. They were lived in real experiences, not trying to manufacture a feeling, you know, and they're very personal. They're not writing about other people. You know how sometimes you can, like how Bob Dylan, right, was always slightly detached. This seems much more, the personal is political as a theme. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. The songs definitely do feel very personal, and maybe that was kind of a barrier too. I like couldn't, relate to them in some way or something.
I think for me too, this also, even though this was recorded in '88, released in '89, this album, the sound behind this is also very, for me, very reminiscent of like college, right? Because it's that, kind of along the line of the Dave Matthews. Yeah, because like me. I'm thinking of like I knew people that would, in their dorm rooms would be playing songs like Closer to Fine for sure.
That's the difference between going to a liberal arts college and a big public university, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And like Guster, that's another band. These like college. Well, OAR was a little bit after me.
Peak New England liberal arts. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So it's very. So when I'm listening, I'm like, gosh, this because I was in college in the mid late '90s, and so this was very popular, in the dorms, this type of sound, that I was experiencing. So, and the other thing, and it just, as you were talking, John, about like, because I agree, I think that there was a part of me that, in a similar way to something like Janet Jackson, like just going back to like me tying this into, artists that I was familiar of because of my sister and the stuff that she would listen to. And there was kind of like, in some ways there was like that was a barrier because I kind of viewed us as different, like, well, she listens to different stuff that I do, but there is a little bit of that here too. Cause you're kind of feeling like maybe this music is probably not for me because, I've never seen a Indigo Girls concert, but I was at a similar another artist that's kind of similar is Melissa Etheridge, right? That has like a similar kind of fan base, and so I was at a Melissa Etheridge show,
but she's way more rooted in rock music.
She is, but in terms of like the persona and and the messaging and stuff like that, they run in similar lanes, and so it's just it just reminds me of how you're at a certain concert and it's just like. The culture itself is just like embedded in the people that are there, and it's always interesting how that plays out.
I'll only push back on that, in that I'm sure there were a lot of people from like the Midwest, right, who didn't have a knowledge of the fact that Melissa Etheridge and the Indigo Girls shared sort of a similar fan base, some of which is because of sexual orientation, right?
Yes.
But like, I definitely could see some people who listen to rock who are like, listen, like, Come to My Window, Come to My Window, or Am I the Only One, who are like, this song rocks in a way that I don't think they ever would have, right, with an Indigo Girls song.
No, correct.
And I think in that sense, right, like, I think Melissa Etheridge's fan base naturally had a lane to be much larger, I think, than
that's
the Indigo
true.
Girls.
That's definitely true.
In 1994. Maybe not now, but certainly in the 90s, I feel like, yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, those songs were everywhere also. Those Melissa Etheridge songs.
That's a good show. She puts on a good show.
Well, and she's another one who kind of like was famously like not super comfortable being niched, right? Like, she's like, most of my heroes are like male guitar player dudes, and so like, I want to play for people with whom I identify, but I also want to play for audiences that male guitar player dudes would play. I think in a way that the Indigo Girls were like, didn't necessarily need to, right? Like, I think they were looking at it as we were broadening it, but we're also a part of a scene, right? Where I don't know if that would have been enough. Now I'm playing amateur psychologist, which I hate doing, but I just saw enough interviews with Melissa Etheridge where, like, she made it a point to say, I like playing in a band with dudes, you know what I mean? Sometimes, like, the energy, and I don't know if that energy, had to be there, right, for the Indigo Girls. I don't think they were like, we need to bring a few more dudes in this. Yeah,
they were both in the Lilith Fair crowd with, like, Sarah McLachlan. I mean, so there was just similar, like, kind of like female artists that I think were more, and maybe Melissa Etheridge maybe not as good of an example, but there were a ton of women, particularly like, more women that looked to be a little bit more on the lesbian side of the aisle. Which
so I never processed Melissa Etheridge that way. I'll be honest.
I remember
how I
from that
processed
show
like
that
Lenny
I was
Kravitz, like, in the sense that they're like guitar playing sort of, they listen to a lot of the blues and Aerosmith and that, like, kind of that lane a little bit. So yes, she could fit into Lilith Fair,
this is just this is my thoughts on a show that I saw like in 1995, and I just remember it's like, wow, this is a different crowd than the last show that I went to, you know what I mean? So, much more female dominated, but that was my only point, that it's just depending on what show you're at, and maybe what time you're at that show too, right? Like the crowd that comes out is a reflection. It's like a culture, right? Music is the culture, and they reflect each other. So, in one way, shape, or form.
Perfect. Well, I think for Matt and I, it sounds like thumbs up. And for Josh, it was thumbs in the middle, right? Kind of right there.
Yeah, when they mentioned kind of capitalizing on the other artists that were popular, like Tracy Chapman and Suzanne Vega and 10,000 Maniacs, I kind of like all of those artists more than this album, from the ones that we talked about. So.
I do too. I'm a little bit more of a fan of like, if we talk 10,000 Maniacs, for sure. I like the fact that they pushed into some jangle pop and indie a little bit more. Who else did you mention there?
Tracy Chapman and Suzanne Vega.
I like the Suzanne Vega album more than I like this one. I would say I felt this album and the Tracy Chapman album were very similar in terms of my overall view on them. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Even rooted to the fact that they each have a massive, gigantic song